Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Vanessa Conlon. I'm the head of wine at Wine Access, and I'm delighted that you're here because we have an amazing discussion to come, an expert group of panelists here today to discuss trends. So I'm going to give just a moment to allow everyone to join, but in the meantime, a couple things I would like to say is I encourage you to make this a discussion for those of you at home as well. Please feel free to utilize the chat box and also the Q&A. I will, as much as I have time to, allow 10 minutes or so at the end to answer any questions that pop up. I'll also keep my eye on it over the next 50 minutes to see if anything comes through in the interim that is relevant to what we're discussing. And as much as I can, I will pose those questions to this amazing group of panelists. So I also encourage you, if anything, you think of something later or you just want to stay engaged with us, we're at Wine Access on Instagram, and we'd love to stay connected and hear from you, including ideas for upcoming webinars that we can add to our lineup. So to start, I just wanted to say again, thanks everyone for joining at home. I wanted to say thank you to this group of panelists who I will introduce in just a moment. And also a special thank you to Decanter Magazine for co-presenting this webinar with Wine Access. So let's just start with why we're here. So we're here to discuss trends. And a funny thing about the wine business is that while there are so many advancements, improvements, understandings that have occurred over time, many of the same traditions practiced centuries ago in wine production are still very similar to practices today. But what changes more quickly is consumer preferences and demands. So during today's panel, we will explore how experts in all areas of the wine business have adapted, learned, and are planning for the future, all within the context that at the end of the day, we're an agricultural product and at the whim of Mother Nature. So to start, I'm going to read the bios of these amazing panelists. Amanda McCrossan, welcome. Amanda is a sommelier, media personality, wine educator, host of the Wine Access Unfiltered podcast, and a creator host of the Instagram and YouTube channel Somm Vivant. As the former wine director at Press Restaurant in Napa Valley, Amanda worked with the world's largest, deepest restaurant collection of all Napa Valley wines in the world. To date, Amanda focuses her efforts on producing wine edutainment, I meant to say that, edutainment, and digital media content for her social media platforms geared towards both consumers and professionals alike. In 2018, she was named a Wine Enthusiast Wine Star nominee for Sommelier of the Year and has been featured by numerous publications and media outlets, including Somm TV, Food Network, Wine Enthusiast, Somm Journal, Food and Wine, World of Fine Wine, and Wine Spectator. Next up, Jesse Katz. Jesse's early adventures to legendary vineyards and wineries around the world with his father, photographer Andy Katz, gave Colorado native Jesse Katz a profound respect for the creative art of winemaking. Inspired from an early age, Jesse's diverse experience spanning 21 harvests at wineries, along with his desire to travel, fed his aspiration to learn from the best in the industry, including Petrus in Bordeaux, as well as time on the winemaking teams at Screaming Eagle Winery and Robert Foley Winery in Napa Valley, and Viña Cobos and Bodega Noemia in Argentina. So welcome, Jesse. Curtis Mann, MW. Curtis is a 20-year veteran of the US wine industry. He started his career in hospitality at ZD Wines in the Napa Valley, where he discovered his passion for wine. After graduating with an MBA from UC Davis, he worked as a brand manager for Trinchero Family Estates and then at Information Resources, Inc. as a director of wine and spirits insights. From 2013 to 2020, Curtis worked for Raley's, a 125-store specialty supermarket chain in California. In 2020, he was appointed Group Vice President of Wine, Beer, and Spirits for Albertsons Companies, one of the largest retailers of wine in the United States. The wine press has noticed his efforts as he's the only person to win Wine Enthusiast's Wine Star Award for Retailer of the Year twice, once for Raley's and once for Albertsons. Amazing. He was also named one of the most influential people in the wine industry by Wine Business Monthly in 2020. So welcome, Curtis. Shannon Staglin. Shannon is a second generation and president at Staglin Family Vineyard. She earned an MBA from UC Davis Graduate School of Management and then chose to work for several years outside of the wine business to gain insight, a different perspective. She was recruited to create the marketing program for Wells Fargo Family Wealth, providing multifamily office solutions to ultra high net worth client families. Shannon returned to Staglin Family Vineyard in 2011 and for the past decade has overseen the day-to-day operations and future plans. She brings new perspective and a fresh outlook that will enhance the family business for many years to come. I don't see Yannick on the screen, but okay, just in time. Yannick Benjamin. Yannick is a veteran in the wine and hospitality industry with over 25 years experience. He's a proud New Yorker born into a family of French restaurateurs. He knew that hospitality was his calling from a young age. Yannick worked at the University Club, Le Cirque, Oceana, Jean-Georges, Atlas, Lydia, and at the Ritz-Carlton. In 2003, a car accident left Benjamin paralyzed below the waist, and he quickly adapted, outfitting his wheelchair with a table that allows him to continue to work as a sommelier and wine educator. He went on to work for Jean-Luc Leduc at Leduc Wine. As a sommelier, Yannick is a two-time national finalist in Top Somm, hosted by the Guild of Court of Master Sommeliers, a three-time first place winner in the Northeast region of the Chaîne de Rôtisseurs, grand champion of the 5th annual Somm Slam at ICC. These are a lot of accolades, Yannick. Second best sommelier in America in 2007 and placed 3rd overall in the National La Chaîne de Rôtisseurs Concours des Jeunes Sommeliers. Yannick has been recognized among Wine Enthusiasts Top 40 Under 40 and was named Person of the Year by New Mobility magazine in 2017. So I'm out of breath now, so I'm going to turn the work over to our panelists here with our first question. So this first question is, I will pose the same question to all of you, which is, what are the biggest trends you've observed over the past few years, and how have you adapted your business to respond? So how about an order of introduction? So Amanda, would you mind starting this conversation?
Sure. Well, I guess as the resident Instagrammer, TikToker, InstaSomm, I think social media has been the biggest thing for me and what I've seen in the wine world and how it's changed and evolved and really brought the wine industry into where we are today and bringing new consumers, old consumers, and sort of opening up the conversation in a way that we haven't seen before. And as far as how it's changed my business, I mean, it is my business. I went from a floor sommelier and wine director at Press here in St. Helena. I parlayed what I was doing on social media, and I really just turned that into my entire business. So it is what I do today. I help other wineries in their social media endeavors, and I speak to it regularly. And I think it's something that is a trend to watch and something I'm excited to talk more about today.
All right, Jesse, how about for you? Same question.
So I think there's been a lot of different trends, but direct to consumer has really kind of changed the evolution of how people are buying wines, getting wines, and introduced to wines. I think social media, to Amanda's point, has a lot to do with how maybe people find new brands. But for many, many years in the wine industry, and certainly still some brands, were so defined by where the distributors would put you, making sure you had those relationships with the wine stores, restaurants. Those certainly still come into play for many wineries and many brands, but the element of direct consumers, whether that is purely online, having a hospitality space, I think that is a huge thing. And also how we're all dealing with climate and climate change. I would say those are the two largest trends that we're very much focused on here at Aperture Cellars.
Definitely a lot to circle back to over the course of the next hour or so. All right, Curtis, next to you, please.
So we've definitely seen quite a bit of changes in the grocery industry, obviously with the pandemic and the way that customers changed their shopping habits. And I think what really we've seen is that return to cooking. So, a lot of the trends that were happening before where people were eating out more and more, and a lot of in fast casual, as well as fine dining. And now what we've seen is people have kind of returned to their own kitchen. They remodel their home. And their behavior has started to change in the grocery store. They want finer wines. They want higher quality wines to make with the food that they're also making at home, or to drink with the food. So that's had a profound impact on our business. And as the pandemic's winding down, it seems to be rather sticky. Like the customers are still interested in this really kind of, experience at home. And so that's definitely been a major trend for us that we're trying to capture.
Got it. Fascinating. And Shannon, same question to you.
Yeah, I think that it's like connectivity with the audience, with the client, I think is more important than it's ever been before. And people aren't buying a product, they're buying something that they has like shared values, something that they can connect with, something that they have created memories with. And so it's more than just an item on the shelf. It's something that's meaningful to the individual purchasing it.
Yes. And Yannick, same question, finishing with you before we jump into some more individual questions.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think as far as trends go here in New York City, one thing I've noticed, I think smaller is better, especially for restaurants and for the future sustainability of them as well. Smaller, less overhead. And also, I think it's much more intimate. And one of the great things about, I'm going to Paris in 2 weeks, but Paris is on fire because you've got these really kind of small, very intimate restaurants. And I think kind of what the whole panel is kind of saying, that sort of one-on-one focus, that intimacy, people are really looking for that right now. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've had so much success at the restaurant that I opened up last year, is that, creating that experience, being there, hands-on, recognizing and addressing people by their name. And there's something to be said about all of that. So I do think that in the future, you're going to see smaller restaurants with providing a unique experience, at least here on the East Coast.
So let's stick with you for a moment then, because you mentioned your restaurant Contento, which was set to open, then COVID happened. So in terms of that experience of COVID, what did you have to adjust to open a restaurant post-COVID?
Well, first off, we were supposed to open in spring of 2020. And then we thought that we were going to open sometime in the summer of 2020, but that never really happened. And we had this restaurant that was fully furnished, ready to go. Our biggest fear was having to open and then get shut down again and then losing all that momentum. So basically, we didn't open until like another year and a half. So we were really bleeding money. But I think that, again, we came in and we gave ourselves, really kind of giving that personal touch. We were there every single day, every single minute, every second. And people really appreciated that. And I went back to the old school. And what I mean by the old school, just simply calling people personally, saying, hey, love to have you at the restaurant, following up with people, going through my Rolodex. And that was what happened. And then word got around. We didn't have a PR team, really took advantage of social media and just a network that I built throughout the years, and asking people, hey, can you blast this on your social media page or some, freelancers and all that kind of stuff. It was really just kind of just hard work and dedication and passion, but most of all, desire.
Yeah. And that kind of reminds me a bit, Shannon, of what you're talking about in terms of the sort of like connection with people and more intimacy. And did you have to do sort of similar things when you were open? Did you reach out to people you knew would want to see you again and provide that experience for them?
Well, I think one of the silver linings of COVID was time, right? We all had more time to think about how we wanted to do things, how we want to communicate, what is the best way to operate our business. And so one of the changes that we made is a more thoughtful communication when we did our releases. And, I write a letter. I don't handwrite every letter, but I do hand sign every letter. So it's like, Dear Jim, I write the date and then I sign my name. And, I think to receive something in the mail that actually has that thought is pretty rare nowadays. And that, tangible feel to it, I think carries some weight, and people understand that takes time to do. Now I still do it. I have a lot less time to do it. But I think that, it was impactful. And, our business model is such that, is really driven by our 2 releases each year. And, we've been making wine since 1986 was our first vintage. And so, establishing a very strong mailing list, a very strong wine club, we were fortunate to have that going into COVID. But, the time that we had enabled us to really connect with those people better than we did before.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of a byproduct of COVID for a lot of people, is we had time to think about things and try something new, and then everything sort of went back to normal, and then we're trying to do everything all at once at the same time. But Jesse, I'm curious your reaction to that as a obviously Shannon's in Napa, you're in Sonoma, but in terms of what you saw consumers wanting or asking you for, did that change because of COVID or coming out of COVID? And if so, like, how was your reaction?
Well, thankfully, a lot of people were still drinking wines, whether they were home or not. So because this business was created off of a mailing list and direct to consumer, really fortunate that we were able to kind of pivot pretty quickly and transition to, instead of maybe sending the wines to our friends' restaurants, we would take that allocation and send it directly to people's doorsteps. So we, thankfully had that network already in place. We were supposed to open this beautiful building that I'm sitting in April of 2020. And so we were in the midst of planning our grand opening. COVID hit, and all the staff that we had trained for the last month getting ready, up and going, we pivoted to these virtual tastings. And so we were able to keep everyone on board, partnered up with some chefs that might have been closed down or had to pivot to pick up food. They'd create menus, we'd ship out the menu, they would be able to cook that dish at home, we'd ship the wines there with them, and we'd do a little video and send it out to everyone. And so we just had to get creative with all that, but really thankful with kind of the core of the business always being based off of our DTC sales, that we were able to continue to grow during that time.
Yeah, that, Curtis, that kind of reminds me of what you were saying about how people were cooking at home, right? And asking for sort of higher end wines, right? In the selections, and that's continued. So, I mean, how has that shifted your sort of overall strategy? And is that impacted by sort of what's available now?
Yeah, that's a great point. So yes, we saw a significant trade up, and we're still seeing that trade up. And it's like, as customers go to the higher end wines and drink nicer wines, it's like they're not going backwards. So, so that's definitely created I think that's going to create some future challenges for us. We've already seen it in certain categories like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, which was already a trade up. And they have a short vintage due to climate change issues, which was mentioned. Then suddenly, oh my goodness, where is all of the, the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc? Where's all of the champagne? We had a huge push during the holidays, and it was challenging getting certain types of champagne. And so I think that's kind of could be a future for the wine industry. And it's going to be up for us as a grocery retailer to kind of step out and we still sell a lot of commercial wines. We still sell a ton of Barefoot and Cupcake, but we're going to have to get smarter about some of those wines that are between $10 and say $30, and think about, okay, well, if I can't get the main brand, what is the best alternative, or what is the best appellation that's the alternative? So we've really got to kind of up our game and think about, hey, what are these key areas that we need to carry so that we have a diversity of selection if we run out of stock?
Actually was a question that I had written down that I wanted to ask you, was like, sort of with these disruptions in the supply chain, with, you mentioned champagne or Sancerre or white Burgundy, or these things that were Burgundy in general, not able. So like, how do you do that then? If for someone standing in a grocery aisle and you have a shortage of New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and Sancerre, like, how do you get them to try a different region?
Well, there's a number of different strategies that we look at. The first being that knowing the regions where appellation kind of trumps brand. And so you can think about that within many of the French appellations, like people are just looking for the appellation of Chinon, or they're looking for the appellation of Burgundy. And I think, because of some of the out of stock issues, customers have become more and more apt to just experiment, to try something that's similar. So we haven't had as much challenges, I say, like getting people to switch out of a Macon, or, to something like a Puy-Fusé, or from a Puy-Fusé to Macon. So that's been good. So we do that. And then also we're working on promoting brands that we know we have stock of and that are really high quality, but maybe don't have the mass distribution. And so we're kind of hedging our bets here, finding great, price to value items that we're pretty much guaranteed we're going to have stock on. And because we're promoting those items, we're, the winery is blocking us in on that item itself. So basically saying, yes, you have priority. So those type of things that, it's the fun part of the business, right? Thinking, how can I get customers excited about something new and interesting? And it might not be that much different from what they were currently drinking, but, hopefully offers a better price of value.
Yeah. So Amanda, I have a question. Well, I have many questions for you, but to what you're doing now, right? And making a career of it. When I started in the wine business, I didn't know that was I never imagined that was possible. So
Me neither.
how did this happen? So how did you go from being a sommelier and a wine director to a social media influencer?
Yes, let's embrace the word. So I started in New York anyway, you slice and dice it, that's what I am. I started in New York as a som. When I got into wine, I felt like it was, I think the way that a lot of people feel about it, I felt it was very exclusionary. It was tough to break into. I had a few great friends and mentors that really helped carve that path. But I did find along the way that not a lot of people looked like me, not that they need to, but I didn't have a way to access it in the way that I felt like I wanted to. I didn't have anyone that was creating content or making videos and this is like basically pre-Instagram, pre-everything. But I felt like there was just, it was books and it was like very dry material. And having a theater background like you, I felt like someday maybe I would take that full circle. And so when I moved to Napa Valley, I thought it was a really good opportunity to showcase not only the region, which was very aspirational, but what I was doing on the floor as a som, and to take people through some of the wines that I was opening and wineries that I was visiting. And it started off very slowly. I grabbed a camera. I didn't know how to do anything. I taught myself to edit. I taught myself to shoot. This is sort of the advent of social media when Casey Neistat is vlogging every single day from New York. Kim Kardashian's making like $500,000 a post. And I was like, well, maybe this Instagram thing could be really interesting. And the wine world really hasn't adopted it yet. So I started the YouTube and the Instagram channel. And that's how I got started, because I saw other industries embracing it and utilizing social media to not only connect with their audiences, but to create great content, to sell materials, to sell, whatever it is whatever commodity it is they were selling. That's why and how.
Got it. And then in terms of content, what do you see that people respond to the most? And do you have any specific, do you have examples or data you can share?
All of the above. They are it's really platform specific, and obviously everyone has a different niche. My mom doesn't follow Kim Kardashian, but she probably follows Anna Garden, right? They're two different people. For me personally, the two types of content that I've really found very successful are aspirational, voyeuristic, as well as educational. And I think that the latter being the more successful, especially what I'm seeing over on TikTok right now. That's a really interesting platform that sort of, for me, feels like a hybrid between YouTube and Instagram, in that people are going there looking not only to be entertained, but educated to some degree. And so TikTok has been fascinating, because the things that I thought people didn't necessarily care about or care about learning, it turns out they do. I mean, like hundreds of thousands, millions of views on videos like port tonging and what is tannin and distinguishing a grower champagne from, your Moet and your Veuve, like things that I just really felt like were 201, 301 level wine things that people are fascinated by. And to me, it clued me into a couple of things. One, we're not doing a good enough job of educating, because if they're super hungry for this information, it means they're not getting it. And based on the response. And two is that I don't think that we're giving the consumer enough credit. I think that we're either dumbing it down or making it too difficult. And we're not hitting that in-between space of giving them the credit to be able to decipher and learn more intense things than I think we initially thought they could. So it's been very interesting to watch specific videos do as well as they have. I think like an Italian DOCG wine law video was maybe the most fascinating response that I've had to date. Like the fact that anyone gave a shit about that just boggles my mind.
Very cool though, and exciting to see that knowledge, that the thirst, right, is actually out there for learning. So Yannick, I'd like to go back to you then for a moment. So to talk about, as a sommelier and the role that plays, how do you, with you have an amazing background in many different restaurants, have you seen the role of the sommelier change over time?
Well, I mean, I think the role of the sommelier, most importantly, is to really create a unique experience. It's not just about, reciting what the wine is, but there should come an experience with it. And I think that's what people remember the most. But what I've done with the wine list really is to really have a strong focus on producers that are having both a social and environmental impact. So that's on the first page, followed by wines of East Coast terroir, so local wines So I call it wines of our own backyard. So featuring wines from Vermont. I have a blueberry sparkling wine from Maine, Virginia, Maryland. I think that's something for a long time. I think a lot of sommeliers, and it happens, I think, where we were somewhat ashamed to feature local wines. And I think, I don't know where that came from, but I just think that was a lack of research, and it was just all the cool kids, right? All the cool little wines from the Jura or from Burgundy and all that. But if you really dig in, there's really some wonderful terroir, and there's some really wonderful producers right here on the East Coast. And then also the third section is wines of the ancient world. And that's been a really successful section because people are just so fascinated, by this history of wines that go back 8,000 years. And so they're all into trying to explore all these unique grapes from Turkey to Georgia to Armenia to Lebanon to Israel. And that's been a very successful section. Of course, the waiters aren't very happy because they're a lot of these words are tongue twisters. They're even difficult for me to say. But the customers love them, and the price points are quite correct. They're really reasonable, and the quality is stupendous.
And how have those expanded selections, let's say, how have they impacted your ability to pair food and wine?
Well, our cuisine is Peruvian. Our chef is Oscar Lorenzi, and he's got a very heavy hand with salt. He loves salt, So, so I think white wines, crisp, dry, refreshing, or on the other side, even some residual sugar, some off-dry Riesling, some Chenin Blancs to really balance out with the saltiness. And then for reds, a lot of crunchy kind of reds too, because what happens is too much salt will accentuate the alcohol, and, trying to, obviously we do have red wines that have oak and nothing against that, you know what I mean? But just trying to find that right balance. So the oak and the salt don't really clash with each other. So there's some thought behind it. But of course, we have wines from all around the world, and that's the beauty of it. So you can pretty much find everything. We have Zinfandel, we have, full-bodied cabs from California. It's something that we pride on. But yeah, those are the ideal kind of pairings for Oscar's food.
Last question. Sorry, I don't mean to keep you on the spot, but just no. I'm curious. I'm curious because I understand from your perspective as the buyer and a sommelier, kind of bringing in, you mentioned wines from like Virginia or Maryland, and I applaud you for being broader minded and allowing people to learn about those other regions. Have New Yorkers responded? Do they want those and like them when they try them, or is it a slow change for them?
Well, for sure. Definitely, very rarely do I ever have someone who comes into the restaurant and says, I want to have a Riesling from the Finger Lakes, or I want to have a Merlot from the North Fork. That does not, I don't think maybe once I've had that. And I do have tourists, people that don't live in New York, outside of New York, who say, hey, I hear you have a pretty decent selection of wines from local wines, and we would like to try them. But as far as people that live in New York, generally speaking, there's definitely a very strong bias for wines across the pond. And what I mean by that is, France and Spain and Italy, those still remain pretty strong. But I will say this, we have a really great section called Heaven on Earth, and that's basically wines from South America. So Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Brazil, Bolivia. And we cannot keep those wines. Those wines flip all the time, and those sell on its own. Those are not a hand sell, but yes, local wines are still very much a hand sell.
Vanessa, can I just jump in really quick? Because there's since we're talking about trends, one of the things that I see all the time on TikTok, I go live every Thursday and I do an AMA, and without fail, the question comes up at least 10 times. What do you think of Virginia wines? What do you think of Maryland, Michigan, Washington? Hometown hero wines are a trend. They're happening. People are excited. I think they're tasting in their own backyard. They want their choices and their drinking adventures to be validated by somms. And Yannick, I think it's really important what you're doing, because it's going to get more Americans drinking wine. And I see it in the comments. I see it all the time. And it is definitely something to look out for. Curtis, start stocking them in your store, buddy. You too, Vanessa.
We have we have 12 divisions, and I can say that in most of those divisions we do a pretty good job representing local wine. I was just in Texas, and we have these big sets at our best stores of Texas wines. So we're helping to fuel the trend.
Got it. Well, and I do see some questions coming through the Q&A, so I just want to encourage anyone at home, please do, if you have a question, post them, and we'll get to as many as we can. But Curtis, since we tossed to you, actually, let's stay with you for a moment. So a question I had for you was, when you're making selections for the stores, how do you determine whether a certain genre is a fad or it's here to stay? So something like, clean wine or zero sugar wine or the like. What's your thought on that?
So this is the $100 million question, and it is probably the most challenging thing to do in the retail space, because we do take quite a bit of risk when we put items on the shelf, right? We buy in a lot of stock, we put them out there, and so determining whether it's a trend or a fad is I think it's super challenging. The thing that I always default back to is taste, because there are a lot of trends and fads. And typically the fads are the ones where the winemaking team or whoever was making the wine couldn't get the taste right. And then that ends up turning into a fad because customers try it, but the acidity's off or the alcohol doesn't emphasize the wine enough or whatever happens. And it just ends up kind of going away because people just don't buy it again, right? They buy it that once. They're like, oh, it would be great if I had, less alcohol in my wine, but can I really get there with the quality level? So a lot of these things that are coming out that people are trying, I think the key thing is that they taste right. I think that, the other thing that's happening too is that some of these areas like, let's say, low calorie wine, customers are starting to get smarter and smarter and realize that, well, actually, if the wine is dry, then it should be low calorie, right? It's not, it's not like there's a huge difference between, this dry Italian white and such, wine that's better for you. So we're seeing that kind of trend maybe flatten out a little bit. So a lot of it has to do with, okay, is the wine itself providing something authentic to the customer? And then that will build that trend. And if it's not, then I think the customers eventually move on and it will be a fad.
Got it. And is there a wine or a region that you really have tried or you just haven't gotten people to embrace that you really, really wish that they would?
Yeah, so we there are quite a few regions, I think, across I think like South Africa offers some incredible price to value. And sometimes we have a challenging getting the customers excited about South Africa because where we place it on the shelf. So sometimes it gets kind of just put into South Africa and over in the corner and, mixed in between maybe, I don't know, Australia or, Chile and Argentina. And so we're really trying to emphasize getting some of those wines out of, placed within the country of origin and moving South African wines like South African Cabernet next to, US Cabernet or next to Chilean Cabernet so that customers can start to explore the world of wine by varietal. And I think that's helped us, but still it's definitely a challenge with some of those regions that are providing those amazing price to values, but hard to find inside of a grocery store.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And then Shannon, if I can come back to you. So you're part of a family-owned winery and the second generation in a leadership role. So as a second generation, are there things you can think of that were sort of popular when your parents were at the helm that are completely different than what you're seeing now? And also now that you have a third generation president who may or may not, be involved in the winery, are there things that you sort of predict that will be different for them than are for you now?
Yeah, well, I think, in my parents' generation, they were kind of not the earliest in Napa, right? But we came in '85 before it got pretty crazy, right? And I think there was like 100 producers in Napa at the time. And there were two very powerful wine critics that really drove and could just make your wine sell out in a second, right? If you got 98 to 100 points. And so that was James Lobby and Robert Parker. And I think that today, you know, with them transitioning and then new people coming on the scene, you just have a lot more critics, right? So there's, you know, who should you follow as a client or as a consumer? And then also just the availability of information, right? Like with social media, with Seller Tracker, with talking to your friends, with your local wine purveyor. Like there's so much more information available today than there was in the early 2000s or the 90s. And so I think that consumers are making decisions less based on points and more based on like, what are my friends drinking? What is being recommended to me? What am I seeing on, you know, over and over again on social media? What has, you know, what's, you know, hot per se, right? So I think that for me, the difference in the kind of the way I run the business is it is less about making a wine that is trying to get a certain score. And it's more about making the best wine that tastes like our unique location and that vintage. And so you're going to get variation, but it's always going to be of very high quality. And being consistent with quality is something that I think will drive people to return again and again to that bottle and producer.
Yeah. And then Jesse, I'd love to ask you, because you have a unique background in that you got to observe all these, you know, historic icon wineries, you know, sort of through the like literal lens of your father's, you know, photography. So how much of what you sort of saw as a child traveling with him are things that you're still practicing today versus something that you would never do now in your own winery?
Well, when I was traveling with my father, and we still travel together, but when I was introduced to wine, I was in my early teens. So it was a little bit different perspective because he started doing books on wine industries. His very first one was in Napa and Sonoma, and I was about 9 or 10 years old. And then he did one on Burgundy and Tuscany and Bordeaux. And after we got outside of California, where I wasn't allowed to drink, and got to a place that if you're in your early teens, they pour you a little glass of wine and introduce it to you as part of the food and part of the culture. I just thought it was so fascinating how a place had such a distinct interaction with that final product. And I think that is kind of coming full circle where consumers are really wanting to know where the wine's coming from, about your farming practices, the story behind it. Many more people are involved in asking about kind of sustainability and that type of element in the winemaking, not only in just the grape growing, but also in the winemaking elements of it. So I think Amanda brought up a good point that people don't underestimate the consumer. There's a lot of knowledge at people's fingertips. And I think what I saw early on growing up was just kind of an introduction to wine and see how, and mostly it was from the old world. And obviously a lot of those traditions still stay true, but how we have evolved as far as the wine industry, as far as farming practices, where we're growing grapes, because California is such a young wine growing region. I think we're still figuring out where the best sites are to plant certain varietals.
Well, and so speaking of that, actually sort of leads into a question that I also wanted to ask you, which is about sort of Bordeaux varieties in Sonoma, which I think we're sort of, you know, we think often or for many years of Napa as Bordeaux varieties, and then Sonoma as you know, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. So from your perspective, working with Bordeaux varieties, what do you think has changed that understanding for the consumer? Is it better quality? Is it just being out in the market more, or how do you explain that?
Undoubtedly better quality for sure. I think that is a key element, and many of the panelists have said, you know, a trend can start. There's a lot of consumers that are willing to try something once, but unless it's holds its weight and has a consistency of quality, that's where trends fade quickly. So undoubtedly, the level of quality for Sonoma Bordeaux varietals is at an all-time high, in my opinion. And a lot of that comes from change in mentality of farming practices. When I started Aperture in 2009, I was still working in Napa. I was at Screaming Eagle at the time. And I came over here, I moved to Sonoma the next year in 2010. And it was really hard for me to get certain vineyards and certain farmers to farm to the level of detail that Napa had been for the last 20 years. And I think that's really starting to change in people's mentality of what Sonoma Bordeaux varietals can be and are, is certainly starting to change as well. And the other element too, which I don't think we can discredit, is the climate. We are seeing warmer and drier vintages year in and year out. And that was my initial mentality. And I still consult for brands in Napa, and I think it's one of the great wine growing regions in the world. But I think Sonoma, up in particular up in the eastern hillsides, which are your kind of warmer areas within Sonoma, because Sonoma is confusing for a lot of consumers because it's probably the most diverse wine region in the world. You have areas closer to the coast that are cooler than Champagne, France, and areas up in the hills that are as warm as Bordeaux, all in Sonoma County. And we have more soil diversity here than all of France put together. And so it's really where you're finding these areas. But the best areas in my mind for Bordeaux varietals, which is kind of up in the eastern hills of Alexander Valley and some of the surrounding areas around there, are as good as anywhere in the world, in my opinion. And the big difference in what I'm very thankful for, and where I'm seeing a lot of these trends go, is it's slightly cooler here than Napa, and we're seeing these wines that are able to ripen on the vine a little bit longer, not having to push bricks and alcohol quite as high to get the same level of phenolic ripeness or tannin ripeness. So I think it's poised to be really successful now, and certainly in the future as well.
So I'm glad. So you brought up obviously climate change. So actually, I have a question that I wanted to pose to both Curtis and to Amanda, which is sort of about, from your perspective, how aware do you think that consumers are? Let's say, like Curtis, for you, if someone can't find their New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, do you think there's an understanding of why? Are we doing a good job of explaining that? And kind of Amanda, then to you, like, what are you seeing people asking questions? Is there a curiosity, and like, what's their level of kind of understanding when you're engaging people with on social media? So Curtis, do you mind starting?
Sure. I'm not sure we're doing a great job at grocery or retail in general explaining some of the out of stock issues. I'm sure that, our high end customers understand, right? The ones that are searching for Burgundy or whatnot, and they, oh my goodness, these frosts are causing all sorts of challenges. But I think most of our customers probably don't know, although more and more are becoming educated about these topics. I think one of the things that we find super challenging, and we're trying to keep that momentum going in grocery, is the idea of sustainability, organic, all these things that are better for the environment. And we're just having a challenge relaying that information. A lot of customers are confused between the definition of what organic is, right? There's organic wines, and then what sustainability is, and then some of the challenges with the terms of biodynamic and all those pieces. And so we're trying to create kind of our own, we're trying to do it a little bit more online, maybe say than even in store, because it's easier, it's more flexible for us. But it is a hard piece to communicate. And so we've been trying to, get that information down to our beverage stewards when we're out of stock of something. The reason we're out of stock is because there were terrible frosts this year. And so, we don't have as much in stock. I don't know if that then gets related down to climate change, but, that's definitely one of the big challenges of grocery retail, is conveying the message to all of your customers.
Yeah, for sure. And Amanda, what's your thought on that? What are you seeing on social?
I'm sorry, are you speaking specifically to climate change or just in general?
Yeah, to climate change, are the people you're engaging with, are they, sustainability, climate change, is there an understanding? Are you having to do a lot of education? Are you getting a lot of questions about that?
That is the one area I'm not getting a lot of questions. And I think potentially it's because their frame of mind is so set on just trying to understand wine and trying to figure out what to buy, that I think once they get in there, they care about ESG. But I think, and obviously climate change and sustainability is part of that, but I think I don't see it as a trend so much as an afterthought, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've talked a bit about obviously the environment, sustainability, consumer demand, supply, but I kind of wanted to talk a little bit too about sort of, social aspects happening and changes. So Yannick, if I can throw this to you. So you've been quoted as saying we have to do better to develop, quoting, a social and environmental consciousness. So what's your advice on how consumers can contribute that, and what can we do in the wine industry to contribute?
Well, the section that we have at Contento with the wines of social impact has been very successful because people are very intrigued. And I think that people want to feel this kind of emotional incentive, right? They want to know that if they're buying something, that they're going to get something in return emotionally, right? Whether that bottle of wine, is supporting a cause, proceeds, or they're, for every bottle bought, they're planting a tree. There's that, property that does that out in Israel. And that's what's happening as far as that goes. That's what I'm seeing, and that's been a very successful model. And we're representing producers that don't look like me, right? I mean, most wine producers do look like me, right? But there's a lot of winemakers, some really wonderful winemakers, whether they're female, whether they have a disability, or they're from the BIPOC community, and they all have a very interesting story to tell. Tara Gomez, for example, Native American, part of the LGBT community. This has been an incredible story, and people just love hearing about that. And it's so unique. And I think when you say it and you tell them this story, people just get really excited. We have Roberto de la Mota, who was in a car accident that left him permanently paralyzed. He's a winemaker down in Mendoza making some wonderful wines, both Malbec and Semillon. Of course, there has to be, the human being has to be kind, but so does the wine, right? Of course, we make sure that the wines are also very good too. But it's even better when the story is great and when they are special people. Staglin is the same thing. They do a lot of great work for mental health awareness and all that. Mm-hmm. And so when you tell them this, and then the wine's great, and they're like, oh my God, it's like it's a winner all around,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'd love to hear a little bit more also about the wine inspector talked about you revealing a kinder, gentler side of the profession. So what does that mean?
Well, for me, it's letting the customer speak, right? Not speaking at them, and just kind of slowly kind of guide them, right? So, for example, the way I grew up is different than some people culturally. I didn't grow up with a lot of sugar. Some people did. Some people grew up with a lot of salt or butter and olive oil and all that kind of stuff. So their perception of sweetness could be very different from mine. So I'll simply say, do you drink espresso? And if you do you put any sugar? Or do you have a cappuccino and then dump a lot of sugar? And that kind of really gives me a good gauge. But I think the biggest issue, and I think it's less now for sure, a lot of sommeliers do like to hear themselves speak, right? They like to use big words, right? They crack a book open and they hear a couple of fancy words and then they start utilizing them. But I think that a really great wine professional or restaurateur, you're able to take all that, complex information, you distill it, and then you bring it to the guest and make it as easy as possible for them to comprehend, because the most important thing, it's about the guest and it's not about you.
Yeah. And just so I be sure we don't run out of time, could you tell everyone about Wine on Wheels? What that is? Sure.
It's an event that I started in 2013, and we raise money and awareness to the disability community, primarily those from that have a physical disability. So those that are spinal cord, MS, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, cerebral palsy, and all that. It's really using resources and the network that I've been able to develop throughout the years to really elevate these individuals. A lot of them who have grown up in lower income backgrounds and don't have the financial resources to really kind of achieve their objectives. People with disabilities, unfortunately, it's a very low percentage of people that actually work, but yet there's so many of us. It's 61 million Americans that have a disability. There's only about 18% that are actually financially secure. So there's a lot of challenges. And one of my goals and objectives going into this new era, we talked a lot about that word pivot, is really creating a program, and the program is going to be called the Solera Project, where we're going to have classes and seminars for people with disabilities to learn about wine, to learn about food, but to learn about other subjects, and have guest speakers, financial advisors, and all that. But the goal is to really get these individuals paid internships in major hospitality companies, wineries, wine companies, whatever it is, and really get their foot or wheel in the door.
Great, thank you. Well, we're about 10 minutes out, and I have a million questions that I'm not going to be able to pose to you all, and we have some great ones coming in. So I'm going to start posing some from the audience. Actually, I've one more that I really wanted to ask Shannon, and then I'll get to the Q&As, which is about being sort of a female president of a winery in Napa Valley, and if there have been any sort of unique challenges that have come with that, and also if you have any advice to give to young females interested in joining the wine industry.
I think that it was the women before me that really paved the way, that, kind of opened the doors for my generation to be able to come in and do this. So I've never felt like I'm a female president of the winery. I feel like I'm the president of the winery. And, so I think that the advice that I would give would be to anyone, really, like female, male, black, white, brown, whatever you are, is to be involved and start from the ground up. Because I think to be really good in this industry, you have to understand all of the facets of it. And if you wanted to be a president of a winery, you need to understand how wine is made. You need to understand how to farm wine. You need to understand how to sell wine and the multiple channels that happen in the wine industry. And so, I started as a harvest intern, and I did that for 6 months, and I learned a ton about making wine, and I learned that I did not want to be a winemaker, right? And so from there, I started working in our offices, and was trained in hospitality, was trained in national sales, started doing all those things, started managing all of those things, and kind of got to the point where I was going to have to manage the people who taught me everything. So I went and got my MBA, I worked outside of the industry, and then I came back. And so having that very, diverse background, and literally starting from the ground and then working my way up, means that I have a very good understanding of all the different facets. And I think that in this industry, you can't just go get your MBA and expect to get a job as a president at a winery, because those jobs just don't exist. It's just, you have to have a lot more background and experience than just business. So.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Okay, so I'm going to get to some of the questions that have come in. So, and I might, if you pose this question and I paraphrase it, I apologize. So the question is, both Jesse and Shannon sell super luxury wine DTC through their lists. Do you see the average age on your lists moving younger? And as a follow-up, how do we get younger consumers to buy and consume expensive wine?
I can take it first. Absolutely. I think that, the mailing list that my parents created was really mainly baby boomers, and most of that generation is kind of, their cellars are built, they're drinking less. They might be selling off their cellars. And so, my generation is Generation X, I think, or Z, I forget which one it is. I'm 42, I think. But I think it's the generation that's in building phase, right? So they're building their careers, they're building their families. If they're into wine, they're probably building their cellars too. That's really where my focus is right now, is kind of my age group, and sometimes younger, right? But we're definitely seeing more and more interest in coming to Napa, in collecting Napa wines from people in that age group.
And Jesse, how about for you?
Yeah, I would say in general, we have a much younger list than industry average, especially for our price point. And I think we're seeing that grow and grow in significant ways, because I forget who stated it earlier, but as soon as you kind of go up to the next level of wine, it's really hard to go back. And we've all seen that. And once you've kind of gotten to taste some of these really fun, unique wines, you want to kind of expand upon that. And we've been involved with great tastings throughout, getting involved in the community and charitable events. And so we're trying to get the wine in front of that new demographic of folks and create an experience around that. And the probably best marketing tool that we have is when someone has it at a tasting, comes to the winery, whatever it may be, there's this really fun story that goes along that they'll tell their friends at their next tasting or at dinner. And we'll see just this snowball effect of all of a sudden a whole new demographic of people just from one interaction that we'll have here at the winery or at an event. So absolutely, we're seeing the younger generation getting more interested in it. And also, I'm sure not just purely interested in one Napa Cab or Sonoma Cab or Sonoma Pinot. They're trying a lot of different wines. And I think it's a much more, it's a group that is interested in a lot of other things and not purely just wine as well. So it's a competitive space, but it's exciting to see that they're quite interested in wines, and especially in the luxury tier right now.
And I think one other thing just to add on that note is that like everybody on this panel is like, we're available, we're out there, we're, connected in the industry, and we're meeting people constantly and making new friends, right? Whether they're people who are our restaurant clients or our wine clients or whatever it might be, like it's about relationships. And this business is like, it's a people business. And so like, it's no longer, can you sit back and just wait for people to, fill out their order form and send it to you. You have to really connect with people. I think that's a difference today too.
Absolutely. And actually this question leads me back to one I wanted to ask you, Amanda, earlier, which is that there's been a lot of criticism of millennials in particular, but of the younger generations of not engaging in fine wine. So do you think that social media can have a hand in changing that?
I think it already is. And yes, I mean, if social media can get someone to buy a Louis Vuitton bag over something from Target and a pair of Yeezys instead of, a $30 pair of Adidas, then absolutely it can and should change the wine world as well. And I'm already seeing it. I'm already seeing people increasing their spending. I'm seeing them curious about these wines. Fine wine is aspirational, just like any other luxury good. It takes marketing, it takes work. They're not just going to get up out of bed and decide to buy an expensive bottle of wine. It's going to take effort, and the old marketing tactics aren't going to work. I mean, you have to look at other industries and what they're doing. The Met Gala just happened, right? That would have been a perfect opportunity for Opus One to get their bottles in the hands of Kim Kardashian or any Kardashian. Sorry for all the Kardashian talk today. Any Kardashian while they're getting ready in the hopes that maybe it's going to be spotted on their Instagram. Like these are tactics that are being utilized in other ways. And this isn't an issue of millennials not wanting to spend the money and not having the money. It's the fact that they don't want to be had. They don't want to buy something and feel like it's not going to be worth the money. Or the other situation is they want to Instagram it. They want to show it off. They want to feel good about their purchase. So give them a reason to feel good about the purchase. Are they going to like the wine? Yeah, it's expensive. I'm sure it's delicious. That's not the point.
Got it. Curtis, is a question that came in for you specifically, which is Curtis mentioned that encouraging customers to switch wines hasn't been too much of a challenge recently. Can the public willingness to try something new be attributed to anything the wine industry is doing? That is the wine industry simply doing a good job of promoting novel wines, appellations, etc., or is there another reason?
Yeah, so there's two pieces to this. First off, in the wine industry, which is different than almost any other consumer packaged good in the United States, is that there's very little brand loyalty. So even on the core items that you think of big items sell in the store, people are not necessarily loyal to them. So they are already willing to switch. So that's been part of it. So that's definitely, a piece of it. And then I believe the social media / education part is the second part. That's really, we're seeing more and more of our customers take the WSET level 2 or be engaged with our virtual tastings, or just like this thirst for knowledge. And that's creating the confidence to say, okay, I'll try this wine, even though it's maybe I've never had it before, but I know what appellation is from. I know what region it is. I know what it's going to taste like. And so I don't know if we've done the greatest job as an industry, but we're getting better in that. And we have the perfect kind of, setup where people want to explore. So we should be good doing this.
Yeah. And we're at time, so I have one final question, and then we're gonna have to say goodbye. But honestly, I could stay here all day, and based on the questions coming in the chat and the Q&A, so could our attendees. But Yannick, I'll end this last question with you. So this came in through the Q&A. how can professionals in the industry, so producers, restaurants, retail, writers, etc., work to create opportunities for people coming into the industry to ensure a more welcoming and diverse space?
Well, I do think some of our leaders are doing a really good job. There's so many wonderful organizations like the Roots Foundation, Black Wine Professionals, so on, that are really trying to create a space of equality for everybody. But if you are someone that feels like you're on the outside and don't know how to get your foot in the door, kind of what Amanda's talking about and really emphasizing, that world of social media has, even though it's so big, it's also made the world a lot smaller. Reach out to them. More than likely someone that's relatively active on social media. And if you have some questions or some advice, you need some advice, reach out to them, send them a little message. I get it all the time. A lot of people who have a disability and are fascinated by the world of hospitality, they'll send me a message and ask me a couple, and then we just kind of bond, and I do whatever I can to try to help them. So it's really taking that initiative and reaching over the aisle and letting them know that you're really showing interest. And I guarantee you that person will definitely help you and provide you with the resources necessary to help you succeed in whatever objectives you want to get to.
Fantastic.
Harvest interns that way. People
That's right. Exactly.
Getting wine, sent me a DM.
That's right.
And they're coming to work with us to this harvest. So
yeah.
People are a lot more, as you can see with this entire panel, people are a lot more approachable than I think certainly in the past, and this facade of not knowing how to ask questions in the wine industry. Hopefully some of those doors have been broken through with what Instagram has given, or any social media platform has.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you. Oh, well, we're at time. So I wanted to say thank you to everyone watching from home. Thank you so much. Thanks for the great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. Thanks to Decanter for co-presenting with Wine Access. Thank you especially to this amazing group of industry experts. It's been an honor to be here with you today. And anyone at home, if you have additional questions, ideas for future panels, DM us or chat with us at Wine Access on Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. So again, thank you so much, everybody, for this fascinating conversation. And until the next time. All right.